The subject of today's analysis will be the first ballad by Chopin. We're going to start off with this very interesting and important passage, which is certainly shaping the future of music. We have this beginning material, which is basically an arpeggiated effigy of the Neapolitan Sixth. Not only is this absolutely making a very nicely blur effect of the tonality, because it is basically A flat major and then suddenly F sharp appears and nobody knows why. But this is something which has to do with Chopin's experimental nature and how he managed to develop the sense for his sentimental and technical connection, which is seen very successfully. But we're not really going to talk about this aspect that much. Of course, this intro is absolutely based, and everybody should be well aware of the fact what is going on here. We're going to focus on the usage of cells and how Chopin's think, and also I would love to give you a grasp of how the analysis should be done. So we're admitting that we have certain pulsation of 8 notes, and this is something which is admitted immediately. We have 8 notes. It's our beginning material. When it comes to the evolution of the material, the curve is heading upwards and then downwards. You can simply see this little change with the quarter note. You see how he is affecting the pulsation, so it's not just about a monotonous flow of 8 notes. There's also this little addition, which is again dealing with the matter of details. Then we're admitting that we're using the first doublet, and then to break the monotonous repetition of the cell, which is preceding the following one, we have this little syncopation, and then again the cell with the same exact curve falling on this D. Then we have a little connection between the passages. Static with a little bit of pulsation. Let's take a look at this beautiful detail, how he's letting this voice sound to the next bar and this voice is not sounding to the next bar. It's a little detail which is keeping some presence still in the echo. And then we start only with the first quarter note, and then the cell arrives. We will demonstrate this passage as a cell, the cell which is this typical, very well-known motive, and its tail, which is consisting of a static melody tone and its harmonic partials. So this is a main part of the motive, and this is its tail. We see very nicely what is going on. So we're mentioning it for the very first time. We have the tail repeating. You see the leap in the tail. Then we have the same cell, but not under the same circumstances, not at all. We see that the accompaniment is different, very much different. And it is basically about the flow which is being kept. That's another type of innovation which is present. The tail is modified. It's a smaller leap of a third, and it's in the opposite direction. With the addition of some chromaticism, as this was purely diatonic, this is the addition of the secondary dominant, which is preceding the dominance of G minor. Alright, we're still keeping the accompaniment, everything is under the same circumstances. Then we've got the cell again. But now with stale, we have a much bigger leap. This hasn't happened yet. We have the leap of an octave. And again, there is a presence of some chromaticism. Again, the function of a secondary dominant, but it's in the shape of a diminished chord, but functioning as a dominant function. And as you can see, this really big leap is followed by the cell, which is actually being mentioned in an altered effigy. For the first time, it's from a different note, but it's also prolonged. As you can see, we're having this type of prolongation with the insertion of the rest. So, to give you a very brief recapitulation of what is going on here, we have the cell mentioned for the first time. It is mentioned for the second time with a little change of the accompaniment. As you can see it here. Just the pulsation on the first beat. Here it is not given, and it's rather functioning as a continuous flow of accompaniment. For the third time, we have it, but again, not under the same circumstances at all. As you can see, it is not the same again, because this D is one octave higher. So it's never the same. And for the fourth time, it's not the same again, because it is from a different note and it's prolonged with the insertion of the rest. And again, the tone is different. Of course, it's F. That wasn't really the case. So that's another innovation, that the accompaniment is rhythmically stable, but the pitch is different. And that's a big difference. Another very important thing which I would like to note is that, as you can see now, the pitch and the height of the note are not the same aspects, because the note can remain the same and we can change its height. That's another big difference, because as you can see, now we've got a note and we're changing its pitch, but now the change is just about the height. It's present. Alright, what's gonna be next? The tail is now with this semitone direction upwards, and now the C with the accidental going downwards. Alright. Again, we're mentioning the cell. We're pretty much repeating what was happening before, but we can certainly do this because the amount of innovation is simply compensating for this repetition. It's a musical strategy that we can repeat because we've got enough time and we've got enough innovation. We've got this large leap. Of course, the harmony changes. It changes to the secondary dominant, and this dominant is for C minor, which is the fourth degree of G minor. But as you can see, the tail somehow manages to prosper. Because so far we've had the head of the motif with its tail, having different curves, different harmonies, behaving in different logical ways. But now, all of a sudden, for a moment, we're pretty much removing this head of the motif, and the tail is becoming the main leader. And it's playing with the amount of chordal tones. As you can see, the C minor here is being heavily accented with these three notes, and then it repeats. It's also a form of musical expression, that we're highlighting something with the usage of texture and with alterations in the texture. And as you can see, we are using this tail as a main motif. It's becoming the leader. But we still have certain echoes of the previous former head of the motif from which this tail comes. This tail used to be a servant, but is now taking a function of the leader. But the echoes are still present. They're still present. And they go and go with their direction upwards, and they land on the trill. It's a beautiful little process, how it goes with crescendos and reaches the top. It naturally has this point of gradation. It's simply present inside of this entire process. And it's the usage of the head of the motif. The tail is still living, it's functioning. We have this little process of a trill. And this entire process is now turning the accompaniment into octaves, the static form of expression, providing a static bass function in octaves. Meanwhile, the tail, which is now becoming the leader, is being transformed. As you can see, it is now falling victim to its diminution. As you can see, we used to have this pulsation of a half note with quarters. But it's not really true here. As you can see, it falls under diminution. And the diminution is also playing with the curve and with the combination of what used to be before. And this happens twice. And again, it's playing with the harmony, which is simply showing the direction. And it is playing with the usage of what we have. Again, we're saving time. This doesn't have to be the main thing. It's combined with its previous effigy, which is allowing us to save musical content and material. It lands on the pulsation again, but as you can see very nicely, the tone for the first time in this cell remains the same, and also there is this accompaniment on the first beat. It wasn't the case here, as you can see. It was the case here, but not the case here. And it always used to be the case that the first beat was mentioned when the diminution occurred. But now for the first time we have this cell with the first beat. And for when it comes to the melodic curve, we're not changing the pitch and the height. And again, as we've mentioned, those are two separate aspects. We're not changing them. You see this amount of musical innovation present? Well, then the functions are changed. The pulsation, which used to be in the right hand, is now given in the left hand. So the static place of 4 bars is now being changed. And do you even see this incredible evolution here? We used to have whole notes, then half notes, and now we have quarters. And we have quarters. This is another little process which is present, which simply adds to the geniusness of the composer. Because of this innovation, we're decorating the pretty much unchanged material with the arpeggio. This is a A major sixth chord, and again, it is resulting in a beautiful cadence, which is something nobody expects. And this is another really important matter of philosophy. They were surprising. When it comes to these 16th notes, actually, the usage of the 16th notes was really low. We only had it in the syncopation, in this syncopation, but not that much. It was mostly about these more basic values. But now we're surprising with this beautiful cadenza while maintaining the innovation. So we're saving time with the innovation. We don't have to bring anything else because the innovation has already been brought. And we're surprising with the cell, which is very rich in its curve. Very rich in its curve. And it's something that cannot, it's something we cannot say that this was not used before, because it is here, even in this little embellishments, even here, and even in these prolongations, as you can see, it's even here. So we cannot really say that this was not prepared, but this is the important lesson that we learn from this. The surprises can be made, they can be made, and their origin can be from the cells which are used in a very small amount. These are mostly embellishments. They have this function of embellishments, but now the embellishments are taking on entirely different, very rich moment. Alright, this happens where nobody could expect this. Nobody. But it simply musically fits perfectly. This is because of the high musicality of the composer, which is undeniable in Chopin's case. Alright, let's continue. We have the material of quarters. The melody is slightly affected by syncopations. We still have little fragments of what used to be here, combined, slight rhythmical alterations. This beautiful chromaticism is simply gorgeous. When you listen to it, it's fitting perfectly. It's a beautiful moment. And again, because of this beautiful moment, he's very static in the right hand. This is the principle of compensation. We're compensating for this activity in the right hand. We're static, simply. This is a beautiful example of that. It's present in all types of literature, even in orchestras, but also the solo piano literature can be a very good example for that. Let's continue. We have this important passage, which is a beautiful example of evolution of the motif. So as you can see, we have these little cells. Apparently, they're behaving with constant changes. We have different tones, but with certain repetitions, of course. For instance, here it might happen, but mostly it is active. In some cases, the little particles of these cells, they meet in repetitions which are, of course, not organized, but that's secondary. What we need to mention is where this comes from. And even this curve of this little cell pretty much gives the impression of what is the possible source. It seems to me, and you can disagree if you desire, that it comes from the former head of the motif, the former primary leader cell that we used to demonstrate as the very first one. And again, it is being used very nicely, very, very efficiently. He's using the methods of transformation, using the pitches. He's using the process of gradation, as you can see, that's undeniable because of this piano and this forte. And the cells of the left hand now, of course, have the function of accompaniment. But what is quite important about them is the amount of notes that they have. As you can see, here we have chords consisting of 3 notes, but here we only have 1. And it's not the same all the time. As you can see, now we have this little transition until it reaches this point of forte. And again, the development of the cell. We still have the interval, then the tight quarter note, the interval, which is of course octave all the time, but not so all the time, and this is a very good point. So we have a process which is consequent with certain innovations. Of course, I didn't forget these 4 notes. Yes, it's true. Again, he's simply highlighting the vertical importance with the chord. So here we have 3, 4, 2, and here just 1. It might not be in the symmetrical order, but again, he's highlighting the importance of harmonies. And this is his own personal stance, which can be seen in many of his etudes, especially the second etude in A minor, which comes from his 10th opus. It's a very good example as well. But let's get back to this topic. And alright, we know about these little details, and here after the 4 bars, the first interval is not octave, and again, the third note of the cell, or the third particle of the cell, is a chord. That wasn't the case anywhere here. It's a surprise, it happens, it's a chord. Meanwhile, the addition of these chordal notes is being compensated in the accompaniment again. Because for the first time in those 4 bars, there is not the interval or the chord consisting of either 3 notes or 4 notes. The compensation occurs in the left hand. And again, this is another brilliant example of how the process of composition works and the manifestation of this very well understood principle in Chopin's music. It falls in this point in which both hands have the same rhythmical volume. And then this agitato, a very clearly intended point of gradation, is, and with this addition, that the first note, alright, it's octave, we're doing all of those things that we talked about, and of course we're repeating because we can do it because of the additions which are present. But one of those additions is this half note. And as you can see, he's repeating the notes, but he can surely do it because this repetition is embellished. And it's embellished with these little things. I call them little things, but they're very important. The harmony stays the same, but it doesn't. At the same time, it doesn't. And let's see why. We have a change here. We have the interval, but this is compensated for this interval here. So we're taking away one note, but we're adding it here. That's the compensation in this cell. Then we have an octave. We have octaves everywhere. So the first note is not one, but it's octave because it is making this needed accentuation of the first beat. And this is pretty much working. As you can see, again, we're taking away one of the notes, but we're adding it here. It's literally like a little childish game with puzzles. We're taking one puzzle and we're giving it to someone else. We're compensating. We're simply using this principle all the time. Little childish games in composition. But look at this incredible geniusness. The same happens here. That's the equivalent of this place. And look at this place. Look at this place, which is the equivalent of this cell. He's taking away, but it's still different. It's still different because he's adding 3 notes instead of 2. So it still stands up and the principle is reached. His technique is so technical, and this is a brilliant proof that Chopin is as logical and as constructionally based as Bach and as whatever type of contemporary composer you could think of, who is thinking in terms of algorithms. This is not the process of algorithms, but it's about the continuation, the consequential forms of thinking, that you really see that, all right, so I am now taking notes from these chords, but I'm compensating with these intervals. That was not the case here. It's a micro contrast, another very important terminology. And this place is also corresponding to this special place with 3 notes. And we continue. We have the octave compensating, octave compensating. Then we have a little change when it comes to the accompaniment. As you can see, the octave is no longer present and it has these intervals which are fully made of quarter notes. We have, I'll have to take a look at this more clearly, but yes, we do. We certainly do. This is something that doesn't really happen here. Here, the place is identical. We have a pretty large leap, as you can see. It's a large leap when compared to this. And this is another beautiful example. The cell, which was really consequent, is now abrupted, and we have this little cascade here. So it's not half notes, it's quarter again, but it has its tail, which was seen here. By the way, there was no tail. Another important thing. There was no tail, and here the tail is present. But now the tail is present again, but with a very small point of reminiscence. And look at this beautiful unit of curve. He's surely making this moment even visually finishing, and now he's breaking this entire cell-like thinking with no octaves, with no accentuations, but the 8 notes manage to break this quasi-leader motive, which was, yes, this leader motive is basically coming from this. It's a fragment, and even a smaller fragment is now taken over with a rich static compensation in the left hand with a little bit of pulsation. So again, we're active here. We don't have to be active here. And when we're active here and active here, it has a special place, as will be seen in coda, for instance. But those are two separate situations, and even Chopin calculates with these situations. It's a crucial thing. And again, then we have this the repetition of this moment an octave higher. Again, with the accentuation, but not in the octave, but in the interval, and with the tail, but the tail is, when compared to this, in the interval, not as a solitary note. And then we have another. We're going even higher with this figure, an octave higher. Everything is being transposed. The movement here is again. So we repeat because of the richness. We can repeat. When we have richness, the repetition is fully wanted and expected. It's a principle of compositional compensation. And we have something uncanny. Something which is incredibly logical, but again, it sounds incredibly efficient and unexpected for a listener. Look at this moment what we've got. We've got these accentuations, these little cells, but now for some reason, he's working with these cells. Again, and these are the results of previous transformations coming from the main motive. But again, now these little cells are being changed in the way that, as you can see, you have the interval and 3/8 notes. But here in this, you have the interval and 2 notes. Another transformation. It's also because of the technical limits of a piano playing. This is pianistic. And other solutions could be pianistic as well, but Chopin, as one of the greatest pianists, is surely someone who should not be doubted for his decisions when it comes to these figurations of his concepts. So again, take a look. You have these cells very rich in their contour, very rich in their contour. Those are cascades and going up and down, but as you can see, the algorithm, the so-called algorithm, which is a process, the consequent process, which is logically based, is present. And it's present in the form of the interval, 2 notes, interval, 2 notes, interval, 2 notes. And he's playing with the harmony, and he's playing with the contour. But the contour is pretty much about going up and down, but that's entirely alright. The richness here is incredible, and it lasts 5 bars, of course, or 6 bars, but this is another reconnection of another moment. So I would really say that this is a process which consists of 5 bars. This that we'll take a look at later is a little bridge, and this is another process which takes 2 bars. So 5 bars, a little bridge, and another 2 bars. Another beautiful usage, simply said. And let's take a look at the left hand. The left hand is consisting of a pulsation. It accentuates pretty much one of the biggest vertical situations, because now you have 6 notes being played at the same time. That doesn't happen too much so far, as you can see. I should be correct about this, because as I can see, well, but here you have 5 notes being played at the same time, vertically same time. Here you've got 5, and here you've got 5 again. So these 6 notes accentuations are special. Again, this is another process of evolution. This is another thing that was taken into accordance. Do you see this? Even the evolution in the aspect of vertical stretto. Simply said, you see these moments, you have 5 notes, but not 5 notes. actually how many real pitches. We only have three real pitches sounding at the same time because this is an octave and this is an octave as well. So we actually only have this E flat, A, and F sharp. That's all we really have. This is another aspect that he's counting on. Even such situations, it's a concept of accompaniment. But this is not a concept of accompaniment. Now it has the function of the motif. That's another important thing. And now this is a function of motif as well, and the evolution is present in its vertical strata. For the first time, we have this richness. And it's another thing that we have to mention. A very similar work of cells is going on in these situations, of course not entirely, because here we have all the beats. Here we have one beat left, so another little innovation. And now he's slowly skipping some of the beats. We only have 4 beats expressed here as well, but take a look at the beautiful little process. You have octave here, and now only one. So let's take a look. 2 octaves, octave and 1, and 1, 1. No octaves. Isn't this incredible? I think it surely is. But I did not really include this cell. I possibly could. It would be prettier. We have 1 note on the first beat, 2 notes on the second beat. That doesn't happen here anywhere else. Then we have 2 octaves on both beats. Then we only have the octave on the first beat, and the second note is just 1 note, and then we have 2 notes, which are not making an interval. And this is another beautiful example of a micro process. And Mr. Chopin was a master of his kind, and he is counting on that. And nobody can ever say otherwise, because you can show him this analysis and everything is simply seen. This situation of cascades going upwards and downwards is being finished by this, again, consequent cell. The algorithm is consequent, but it's slightly monotonous in its direction. It's going downwards. And this is another special situation in which we have 2 hands in their close proximity. So we have the bass, harmony, and melody function being very close to each other. So it's a contrast in this as well, that we have this lower register pretty much in the second half of the piano, pretty much. And this is another sort of attempt to make the process more stable. We have these dynamicisms, so we're making the energy more stable with the usage of curve. And why? Because we still keep the pulsation of the 8th notes. That's still present, but it's not so rich in the curve. It's rather static. It's an ostinato pretty much. So we're static in the curve, but we're still maintaining the pulsation. And this is the moment how Chopin, or how any composer, can keep the pulsation. So keep the grind, in very simplified terms. Keep the grind, but do the change in which a listener would really get the feeling that we're making something more stable, we're calming down, but we're still in that. We're still keeping the move, we still have the pulsation. An excellent example of that after these rich cascades of differentiated curves. And that happened, by the way, with a very sweet little process in the accompaniment as well. Again, as a reaction to this little process, here's an octave, 1 note octave, 1 note octave, 1 note octave. So there is a little game even with this. even with this. Look at look at this astonishing amount of aspects that a composer had to count on during the process. Simply incredible. And this little process, as has been explained, managed to occur just for this. And again, we have the cascades, rich with crescendos, with decrescendos, everything rich. And look at the figuration. Now, it's another contrast because we don't have these cells. We don't have these cells, which, by the way, come from this, and this comes from this, and this comes from this. You see the transformation. But now we have another micro contrast, which can be felt very well that we don't have these cells, but we have only 8 notes. We maintain the richness of cascades, but it's only about 8 notes. And it's beautifully resulting with this upwards cascade here. And here another passage begins. As you can see, we managed to talk 41 minutes. And we were talking about really 4 pages. We were talking about 4 pages. And it took us 40 minutes. Look at this gorgeous, gorgeous compositional process in this ballad. That even with these little details, the contrast is defined. The cascades are now just with 8 notes, and look at their richness. It is going very up, then it goes slightly higher than this, but still lower than this, so that's another micro contrast which can be felt. Then it remains in that position, and that goes again high, high, high. It's here, that's the equivalent of this place, so the height is the same, and now it goes down again. Remains, it's another wave, and then it goes up all the way up, and it gets finished there. And it's even higher than in the previous 2 situations. So that's another micro contrast that for the third time, it's not going into the same place but even higher. And the technical element was included in the way that we have the cascade, which goes really up and then goes up, but the height gets repeated twice and it's lower than the previous one. Then it goes up. The height is of the equivalent pitch as here. Then it goes down, and the process is defined in its consequential work that we still have the equivalent situation. We're pretty much doing this. And then we go up again, but higher than in the previous 2 situations, and we finish there. And we're preparing the arrival of the new theme. And again, this is a very important compositional principle in which you can also define the quality of the composer. He's not finishing this passage and keeping the rests in the left hand, because possibly some mediocre composers might put a fermata here and let this arrive perhaps a beat or 2 later. But no, Mr. Chopin is connecting this. So this process, which is beautifully finished upward, is finishing with the new beginning. So where something ends, the new era begins. A very nice option to express this, and we'll get into this in a moment. I would love to talk about the accompaniment here as well, because here's another crazy thing about it, and that's the preparation of the intervals. This theme, as you can see, is consisting of fourths. The fourths are undeniable. You can see them already. We've seen them 4 times. Not only is this connection preparing this, we have the fourth, the fifth. By the way, the fifth is a permutation of the fourth, and the fourth is a permutation of the fifth. That's another internal relationship, just to make things clear. Again, fourth, and as you can see, the craziness, again, the process, the micro process. The fourth is simply longer, the fifth is a quarter. The fourth is longer, the fifth is quarter. The fourth is longer, and then the fifth is shorter, but even the fourth is shorter, and then the fifth is shorter, and then we've got the longer fourths. And even when this is still working in this quasi algorithm, it is longer than the fifth, but not so long as these previous 2 instances. Another evolution. How is he essentially making this connection? The fourths are longer, the fifths are shorter. All right, works twice. On the third time, it still works, but it's not so long as here. And then he completely denies it by making them equally long. And with that little game, the theme begins. With the accompaniment, very simple, but of course rich in curve. We could potentially describe him as coming from this. He's sure coming from this. There's a beautiful visible evolution that we have the quarter, then 3/4, and now we have 6/4. And the echo can be seen even here with this 2/4, 1, 1, 3, 6. Another micro contrast. The question is, you might ask yourself, was really Chopin calculating with all of these details, which we are analytically proving? He definitely counted on the majority of them. Some instances are worth discussion, but I do believe, and you can express yourself behind the scenes or below the video, but I do believe that he was calculating with nearly everything that I express. And that even if he does not calculate with something, I do think that it was a process which was going on the subconscious level of his thinking. I do believe in that. That the composition is so automatic that some of these details are functioning on the subconscious level during the process of composition. I do believe. The accompaniment here is also foretelling this, because this was not really the case here. It was mostly about the chords and octaves. But here, again, simply incredible. He's working with the fifths and fourths for the first time. So even the accompaniment here from the bar 56 is foretelling this. Not to mention that we had the fourths and fifths here all the time, ever since the beginning of this place. Fourths, 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 all the time. We had fourths, fifths, fourths. Look at this. And when they're not present here, what did the Chopin do? What did Chopin do? He included them in the accompaniment. And this is a beautiful example of genius. A masterful example of genius. Nobody can deny that. When there is a particle which is included all the time and he works with it. For a matter of contrast, alright, he removes it, but he includes it. Partially, but what? It's a matter of micro contrast. Again, he's not completely removing it. He's not. He is including that, foreshadowing its existence. Again, in a completely different, contrasting world of music, because it's a slow, poetic passage. This is a rapid, very rich, and very complex passage of curves. But here, he's still including that as a form of accompaniment. Of course, partially, he's still combining with octaves, with one notes, but again, fourths and fifths, and here they get this contour, and they are foreshadowing this the entire time. What does this mean? Because this gives us a logical hint. This simply means that the composer had to count on the entire motivic structure of the piece beforehand, because he wouldn't be able to craft this so well. Another option is that, alright, and if we even wanted to count on that second option, that he did not really know the full effigy of the piece before he started to compose it, he would have to manually do all of these little details that we have fourths and fifths, then we put them in the left hand, and then we do these little process, and then we have the theme made out of it. He would have to craft it afterwards. And I don't personally believe that such master as Chopin would do this afterwards. I personally do think, and I agree, that all of this was counted on beforehand. That all of this was counted on beforehand, and that this is his logical and musically felt emotional addition. It's a thrilling example, really. There is a lot that we could talk about, as you can see. The ballad itself is incredibly complex and long. But you really do see the details which are present. You have the theme made of fourths. You see it's more static, then it gets more active. We have these pulsations increasing, as you can see. We only have more static 1/4. The first syncopation, alright. More static 1/4. 1/4, but with a little increment in the register. So he's static, but he's changing the register. Again, the work with the particles of musical speech. And then, well, it's repeated, and for the first time in these bars, there is this bigger pulsation of 4 consecutive quarters. Alright, then again, more static, the syncopation, repetition with different pitches, and then probably the most active point, we have 3/4, but the toplet and the 8 notes, and because of this richness, we're more static again, but with the arpeggio. Again, another innovation. We're more active here, and then we're more static here with the arpeggio. I do believe that a musical process is all about such movements, all about such logics. So the activity is being compensated here. Meanwhile, the accompaniment remains rich when it comes to its contour because of the harmonical progress, and the change of activity is being seen in the right hand. Again, large leap, relatively static, but there's this cell of syncopation, relatively static, but we still have the quarter, and then a similar moment that could be seen here, but the leap is static. It surely is. We have a first major innovations when it comes to the accompaniment, and here it starts. It's getting quite more innovative when compared to this. Here we only have this monotonous type of curve, and here we have this innovation of a second voice being held. That wasn't the case before. And even this static moment is sufficiently compensated with two tuplets. This didn't happen here. We only had one tuplet. But now we have two tuplets. And the amount of static environment is quite more present. So this is another little thing. Because here we had a slightly more active situation, slightly more active because of this. So we only had one tuplet. But here we have pretty much 5 bars of static environment, so he's using two tuplets with quarters and with the addition of the cells of accompaniment being broken for the first time, as you can see, because we had these phrases of 6 notes all the time. For the first time, we have only 3 notes. And look at this gorgeous little majestic thing again. Again, you have the cells. There's no second voice, but here the second voice arrives, but the cell is still kept as the phrase in 6 notes with the second voice. But here the second voice is present, but for the first time it's only 3. And the last cell is only in 3 and it's without a second voice. Do you see this incredible, masterful plastic behavior again? You have the cells of 6 notes under one phrase, then you have the middle degree of evolution, then you have the second voice but it's still in 6 notes, and then you have the middle voice, the second voice, and the final part of the progress that we have 3 cells, or 3 particles in one cell to be more specific. That's a more correct. So we have 3 particles in each cell, and the second voicing is kept, but not in the second instance. Again, pure masterfulness. All right, then we have the cell that we know very well, but in the diminution. The cell is being with 8 notes with this little addition at the end. And the heads are talking beautifully. They're talking beautifully. Exactly how the process of compensation works. So there's a cell which says something. It has a holding point, and the friend replies. This is an excellent example. An excellent example. In this particular situation, they do not blend. Because you might say, well, the hands wouldn't really collide. This could potentially be a longer value. But the Chopin very well calculates, and as you can see, the blend happens here. So it's not blended here with this cell which you very well known, but it's in its diminution with this holding point. And even though he doesn't really do this intervention of blending, the intervention happens here. And they finish on this holding point again, and it happens here again. Not to say that we know the origin of this cell, it's simply the diminution of this, but right here, as you can see, I very well know what could this come from, and as you can see, it comes from this. But because of the fact that we used to go quite frequently for tuplets, triolas, to be more specific, here, well, triolas are simply seen. This little particle is included, and the theme is simply the reproduction of the very first leader theme, the basic theme of the ballad, with the combination of one of the already included particles or objects. Let's call them objects. Really, because we had these objects of triolas and we had this leader theme. They get merged, and all we have is this theme. All right. We have the repetitions, the intervention. Here, the repetition is not present. He's slowly dosing little changes. He's changing only one note here, but the harmony needs to be expressed accordingly with that change, and that also causes this situation and this situation. We now have this motif being slightly abrupted with two triolas, but with syncopations, and the cell of 6 notes, or with 7 notes, and one of them is the holding point, being dissected into these two little cells. Again, the holding point and only a small fragment of what was here. So again, we see that very nicely. This beautiful minor subdominant activity here. It's a beautiful, very beautiful music. We're looking at the technical aspects. The technical aspects add the beauty as well. After this little abruption, we continue. But as you can see, there is still a little change, and the little change has to do with the fact that the blending project is happening, but with the change of the height. We're not changing the pitch, we're changing the height. And as you know very well, those are two separate aspects of musical speech. So we're not changing the pitch, but we're changing the height. But it still blends, but it's another innovation in the process. It's a micro contrast. Well, what do we have here? We have this for the very first time. We have two tuplets coming on the weak beat. The curve goes up. The intervention is still present. But now we have this little addition of a cell which doesn't have a triola in it. The intervention is still present, but there is one very important thing which I particularly noticed, and as you can take a look, these cells of 8 notes were communicating still after the holding point. Still, there was the holding point, then the response, the holding point, and then the response. The holding point and the response, the holding point and the response, which is in fact not really true here. Still partially, but not entirely. But this is another masterful thing, because here it's still not true, but it actually is. It's another beautiful moment, because here, as you can see, they simply start at the same time, and the proximity between the response of the first speech of the left hand is being limited, because we had the quarter and then it was one beat after, but that is changed here. This is tied, but logically it still functions that this is sounding at the same time with this, so it's still inside the same moment with this C flat, with this A flat, it still has it. Then we return to this same aspect. One beat later, here it gets limited with the same situation as here. Then one beat later, and then the situation is very similar like here, but without the tuplet. But it's still limiting the proximity. So it's again that middle stage of evolution of this process which is going on, and this process has to do with the changing of the proximity of the responses, the limitation of these responses. And here, as you can see, it goes up. It's simply the point of gradation, the relatindo, and here it is the breaking point, which didn't happen. Didn't happen, not even once, in all of these bars. And the moment has to do with the fact in which they sound at the same time. So we have this homorhythmic point, simply identical rhythm in both hands. And at the same time, this moment is incredibly, incredibly essential, because this is a modulation. And this modulation has to do with the modulation to A minor, in which the theme comes. The leader, basic theme of the ballad comes again. And this very important moment is done with a beautiful modulation. Honestly, this is one of the most beautiful modulations I ever heard. Really. Incredibly beautiful, incredibly natural. It's a big modulation because it's reaching A minor from the key, which is relatively far. Not too far, but relatively far. And the moment is highlighted with this beautiful little evolution, with even the contrast in this. The evolution is present. Look at everything that includes the evolution. The responses, as we manage to express, with the proximity between the responses, with the little games in which the response is limited, until it plays at the same time, and that the moment is the moment of modulation, in which we manage to modulate to A minor. And another evolution has to do with the development of the cells. Simply, he's playing even with the tuplets. It's never the same. Another evolution is present with this blending. Here it is one octave above. It's not changing the pitch, it's changing the height, but the effect is still present. Even here, this is without the staccato, and this is with the staccato. For the first time, we have the tuplet, or the series of two tuplets starting on the weak beat again. Yes, it happens here as well, and it happened here, but there was a tie. Now this is without a tie, and it's simply repeated here for a purpose of fortification, that yes, we count on this. We all know that this is not a pure random hit, but it's verified, because this is very important. As you can see, Chopin is very well aware of it as well. You have to repeat in order to make your steps legitimate. If this was the only case in the entire section, well, nothing would happen. But in some cases, when mediocre or less experienced composers do this, You might say that, well, this was some kind of error, or this was some kind of not so very well thought out behavior, which is not technically plastic and not technically perfect, as can be seen in these little scenes which I demonstrate. So this is very important. In order to make your steps legitimate, you should actually repeat. Repeat so your steps look legit and your steps look logical. It's also very important, I hope you understand, but sometimes you have to repeat in order to make certain things look real. Really. And that might be a very good example with when you say something unexpected and you have never said that. For instance, a very distinguished gentleman who's really strictly watching his dictionary says a bad word for the first time in front of his mother or in front of his father. Surely they will be surprised and they will look at him with their surprised eyes and they'll say something like, "What did you say?" And that's the same thing. He has to repeat, or they at least expect him to repeat to make these steps valid because it's for the first time. It's not really anything that they would be accustomed to. And something very similar happens with the usage of objects in composition, that sometimes the repetition is actually the way to make your steps look legitimate. And something similar could be said about the situation. All right, we have this beautiful point in which we finally have the two hands playing at the same time. And we have this modulation to A minor in which the theme is repeated. Take a look at the very first theme. It's equal to the second repetition of the theme and to the third repetition of the theme. The difference comes in the fourth repetition of the theme, where, as you can see, the second and the third eighth note with the false second voice remain the same, but the first, the fourth, and the fifth notes are changed. So again, this is another form of differentiation and material work which is seen in the section. And this is another very good example that Chopin comes with different pieces of micro contrast which are not necessarily algorithmically set in advance, but they simply work because of the harmonic and mostly harmonic goals. As you can see in the entire section here, which is consisting of, let's say, 4 bars, you can see that it is again working with the tail of the theme. So we had the leader, or the head of the theme, and then we had its tail. And now we see the procedure which is working with the tail. And we again see a beautiful piece of micro contrast here. As you can see, the accompaniment in the left hand, it's sounding on the third, second, and the fifth beat of the bar. But that only happens once, and then during other 3 repetitions, we have the fourth beat expressed, which is a very crucial and very important thing that we see here. Another important matter in which Chopin thinks of these matters and innovates endlessly. We see that this section is simply repeating itself with a crescendo, and it's heading towards another formation of the previous theme, which you may remember because of the fourths and because of this accompaniment, a beautiful lyrical melody with a sweet romantic accompaniment. Well, now this is being prepared by this repetition here, and the entire section is basically a piece of gradation because of its entire process, and it's finished on this arpeggio, which is, by the way, one of the most vertically full and intense moment in the entire piece. And this moment is the very same instance for this purpose. We see for the second time in the composition, because here's the first time, we have 5 notes in the right hand, which is really the peak, and again the contrasting peak in the bar 106, that we have a really full texture, a very full chordal texture. Again, the accompaniment is made of quarter notes. That's something what could be seen back then during the first mentioning of the theme. But now we have a little change. We have chords and a very beautiful and wide chordal texture, which is again not in the previous key, but it modulated. A very good instance is that on the first chord we see that we have a larger amount of voices, and there's another little microprocess here. We have 5 voices, 4 voices, and 3 voices here in the right hand. So we're going with this little process of removing voices, and we stay on 3 voices during another evolution, as you can see here. It's mostly about, with these embellishments, it's not really comparable, but the majority of different progress is with 3 voices. So this being said, the very first bar, again, as you can see, because of the importance, it is highlighted with a larger texture and with bigger harmonic power. Then, because of the psychological effect that the listener knows that the situation is simply very grandiose and very pompous, it gets back for the sake of easiness in performance, especially for that, but also for this reason of already described perceptive moment. We're getting back to a more easier figuration in which we only have intervals in the left hand, and again we're experimenting with the curve. It's basically the transposition of the original theme, which is harmonized. If we repeat, we have octaves. Again, that's another micro contrast. Chopin could possibly use this chord here again, but no, he's using octaves instead, as giving the obvious sign that it's basically just the repetition of the melody and that it's not given this valid accentuation of being worth the harmonization itself with other intervals. These embellishments are already known. It's very nice to see little changes in the accompaniment. We see that Chopin was doing these curves, another 4 bars of the identical curve in which he does his changes here, with the addition of the second voice. And again, he's got the type of curve with which he's consequent in 2 bars, and then the curve remains but without the second voice and with the change of intervals, which is of course a sake of harmony, and it is adapting for the goodness of the harmonic progression. But the overall process is bringing innovations even here. This is already something that could be seen during the process before. Here in this moment, except for this enrichment, again, we have a beautiful, very, very decent and brilliant figure, and another very strong texture with 5 voices, and the repetition of the theme with slight alterations. The curve is back. We see certain syncopations and additions in its figuration. And now we see the very first chromaticism in this section, which has a very clear service. It goes up chromatically, then with a subtle embellishment, as you can see, there's a there's a half note as well, and then with this little embellishment on the top, it is going through this chromatic journey upwards again. And with the slight changes in the accompaniment, it is going there for the third time with the gradation of forte fortissimo, and it's reaching the top from which the cascade goes down, and this is how another evolution of music comes. When it comes to this moment, it's very important to say that we can depict another cell. We remember one of these cells being found before the quartal theme. This is how I'm going to call it now during another process of analysis. Now we see the following process. As you can see, we have the interval and three notes, 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 and this last instance is of course an exception. We have the interval and one note. But again, this cascade is not only pianistic, but it's also very well organized, and it has its own internal order, which is, as you can see, fulfilled very strictly. It's a beautiful example of gradation, which is mentioned for the first time. For the second time, it is given certain addition when it comes to the figuration, which is quite different. As you can see, for the second time, we have two octaves instead of this curve which goes upwards and downwards. And for the third time, this time we go to much larger dynamics that were not really specified here, but here it is specified, and we start off the new point of the piece. And now we're again working with the eighth notes, which are not yet given any intervals, but it's mostly a static oscillating place, which is of course worth a debate, but it's basically about the four bars starting themselves with the accompaniment of these cells. It's something that we already know. Two bars and two bars. Again, periodic sense of thinking can be seen very well. And now we see this growth, a beautiful motion upwards towards the point in which it oscillates a bit and then goes downwards again. A beautiful sense of curve in which the scherzo part comes with a typical figuration, from which another very interesting aspects arrive. We're going to get into this later. So, from this passage, as the oscillating motif starts to sort of open up to the sky and something keeps heading upwards, we see that we've got the beautiful figuration of having the chords accentuating the heartbeat. Plus, a very important thing which can be seen here is that the Chopin again does his own change of micro contrast, as for instance starting without the chord, going with the chords upwards. It reaches the point in which he can be static and is again demonstrating the principle of compensation. As we can see, he was complex here, but he had the need to accentuate the harder beat. Now, when it reaches the top, it now goes with the static movement, then with no movement at all, and then we have this beautiful, rich figuration in the right hand. It's very rich for curves. It goes in many directions, and very important and very innovative figuration in the left hand. As you can see, we have the following formula. Left hand, then this cell, this figuration, which is not made up but comes from here. It only has the second voice harmonization, because otherwise it would be really poor for the harmonic expression. So this needs to be included. Then we go again downwards, and then we get back up again with the cell, but now in the second voice. So we have the involvement of the cell now in the first and the second voice. Chopin is even working with this on a very sophisticated level. Except for this complexity in curves, again, it is bringing something new when it comes to the combinations of workings and potential solutions with curves. Again, it goes with the same formula. Bass, the cell number one of the section in the first voice, the harmony going down, going back up, but the cell number one of the section is in the second voice. The entirely same principle is working in this bar, except for the fact that because of the musical reasons, we don't have this cell in the second voice, but we have it in the first voice as well. The same thing happens here, but now, as you can see, we are not really changing the register. We're staying down. So we were up. This was fulfilled with a little change that we're not in the second voice anymore. And in this bar, we're down all the time. We're not switching to the treble clef. And we're also in the first voice. So that's another beautiful evolution, that he broke the rule because of the harmonic and melodic reasons. And now he does it also because of the fact that the figuration itself is either going down, it's leaving its original register, is going down, and we have to mention, this is going to be very important afterwards, that we have the accentuations with these false second voices here. This is very, very important for another evolution of the piece. After that, we're getting back to the complex curve again. So it's really going up, going down, going up and going down. And again, we have this very well-known figuration. We're getting back to it as the innovations were made. We can now repeat again. And this is actually exactly the same as in these two bars. We're going back, but the thing is, again, which can be seen here, it's only in the first voice, but still with the changes in register. And then we're actually staying down there, and we're having these four quarters. That's also because of the fact that the curve itself is leaving its register and it's going in this motion downwards, in which it accentuates this point, and from this point on, there's another sort of snake going up very slowly in certain parts. It goes up here, then it goes back to A, then it goes to B natural, and then it goes to this G, which is a top point of the section, and goes back down in these relatively heavily chromatized way. What is very nice for this passage is you can very nicely see again the accompaniment, again the connection of two separate parts of the piece. It's very nicely seen. It's something that I particularly love about Chopin because he does this very often and in a masterful way. As you can see, we have a section which is really octave based. The accompaniment is really in octaves, but this wasn't really about the octaves beforehand. We had actually really rich accompaniment when it comes to different intervals and harmonizations and so on. So Chopin knows that his piece will have these two sections. Well, he's again preparing a middle section to connect these two opposite and contrasting patterns. And he does it with a sophisticated way that he's in the accompaniment of these four bars, he's including the chord, but he's including the octaves. The octaves are included in this figuration. The interval, the octaves. The same rhythmical structure is to be seen here. The interval, the octaves, the interval, the octaves. In the third bar, There is a change, but the beginning is the same. We have the interval, the octaves, the interval, and only one octave to accentuate that something is surely going to happen. And what is going to happen is that we're reaching the turning point from which we're going down, but we're never coming up back again in the same way. We're using this type of figuration, which we're going to demonstrate in a moment. But it's also a very nice musical moment that he's simply skipping this octave, and he's doing it for musical reason. There is an algorithmic, or call it process, whatever type of strategy which is broken for a musical reason. And this is one of the most important lessons which also Chopin gives us, but of course many different composers. But for the sake of explanation, as we're explaining and analyzing the ballad by Chopin, he does it absolutely extraordinarily. And the fourth bar of this section is now a very nice reminiscent detail about these cells communicating with the interval, one note, interval, one note. But again, there is a nice detail in the fact that we're not actually accentuating the first note but a second one, which is an interesting addition. As this was very nicely and smoothly prepared, the section of rapid octaves comes to place, which is then again with these quarter pulsations reaching its definitive point from which another very important passage comes. But when it comes to the right hand, well, there is a cascade which we said that it's never going to be the same again, and that's true. It's truly never going to be the same again. And we're starting another type of innovative curve, an innovative work in the right hand which hasn't been done yet. And again, with the usage of the secret second voice, from which something is really going to happen. He wouldn't really put it here just like this. And it's also for the accentuation, but it's also for the sake of musical and artistic beauty that this has a much deeper reason than one would think. And he's using that only on the third and the fifth eighth. And he's going up in the variety of intervals. He's going up in the variety, a very nice variety. There is also a structure, by the way, a very nice structure. As you can see, the first interval is of the octave, the second interval is of the third. And this process is very consequent and beautiful. A very nice demonstration that it's not always the same, of course, for the sake of occurrence. Sometimes it might happen that a little change will occur in these intervals, but again, there is a structure which is broken when needed, and the intervallic relationships are also a very good way to prove that. For instance, here again we have octave, we have the third, and mostly the last intervals of these cells are differentiated because of the musical reasons. But for instance, here we have it again, very nicely done and very nicely prepared. So Chopin is an excellent, really excellent way of showing how we have the structure which is prepared, which is very based and very nicely scheduled with certain musical aspects which simply naturally make this, well, simply interesting. We reach this turning point in forte fortissimo, in which we have this accentuation which communicates with this previous moment, with a large curve going up, another type of cadenza climax here. And from this moment, we're again starting this middle section, which is preparing the final figuration of the quartal theme, now with another contrasting fragment and another very contrasting and beautiful movement. But we somehow need to finish this very curvy and very richly oriented passage. It would be very correct to do so. So Chopin is using a beautiful way to do it. And let's see how. He's still keeping the richness of the curves with the reminiscence of these pulses from the octaves. He's not leaving it. He's actually not leaving it, but he's not harmonizing in octaves because it's not really what he wants to bring. This will not be about the octaves in the left hand again. So he's using the chords and intervallically rich structures again in the same rhythmical pulsation. As you can see, it's the same except for the last beat, but this is still kept. The last beat is modified for the purposes of cadential resolutions, but this is still kept. It reaches this point, and again, a very nicely and innovatively executed and rich form of curve, which has like two separate ends. One is here, the second is here. This is reaching the final point from which the curve goes all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. The new section brings another contrasting figuration of the theme, which is now in its original key of E flat major. But the difference is in the figuration that it's now in 8 notes and it's constant. As you can see, as you remember, the very first time it was in quarter notes. Now we have it in 8 notes. And the figuration is harmonized instead of just intervals of especially most likely fourths and unison. Now we have it in 3 voices, except for this moment again. And we have another very nice figurations of these original embellishments going very nicely and logically downwards. Again, the cells are in sixth, except for this very first one. It's perhaps because of the original situation of the bar that the melody is also starting in the second half, so it's naturally keeping this as a cell of 12 notes with the slur, and now we only have the cells of 6 notes with the slur, as could be seen in the original cases. After the embellishments, we do arrive to another very strong accentuation of the cadence, of which the resolution is actually in 2 voices. So this is a very nice contrast how this chord is really heavily accentuated. Basically, the dominant is very heavily accentuated, while the resolution is actually contrasting in just 2 voices instead of 5. A very nice moment. The curve is remaining very similar, with the first moment being here. Again, we have the cell of 12 notes, and here the cell of 12 notes as well. And this section is finished with this very beautiful moment, the beautiful cadenza, which is a very nice cherry on the top of the cake. With the theme that we know very well, we were discussing the blending and the communication between the left hand and the right hand, and their principle of communication. Well, in this case, it's not really present because we have a constant form of contrasting accompaniment, but well, in the right hand remains with everything that we already know, with the tuplet beginning on a weak beat, and with all of these figurations with a full second voice and everything that we know, with beautiful little microprocess innovations, for instance, like this and like this, and again doing everything that we know very well. And now this is also something that we were talking about. The communication was also creating a source of changing the level of proximity between the right and the left hand. Well, now in this case, it's not really present because of the constant accompaniment, but the Chopin does it in a very sneaky way. And how? Well, here he's not really allowing you to think that he's merging, because this is in tuplets and this is in eighths, but there is still some kind of merging. And here it is very nicely seen that because of this tie, it's not about the entire cell of 6 notes that would be in the same rhythm. It's just about 5 and 6. Again, about 5 and 6, the synchronization is going. Again, the 5 and 6, and again the 5 and 6, till the curve of this enclosing passage, again, which is preparing the modulation, goes in these directions, fluctuating upwards and downwards until it goes down and prepares the return of the main theme, the leader theme of the whole ballad, again in its natural key of G minor. We see some innovations also in the phrasing, and Chopin is not really using the phrases of 6 notes under the slur, but experimenting with 12. Now we also see even a larger cells, and he's changing that depending on his feeling. So as you can see now, we have even 24 notes under the slur, and the innovation is also present even in this aspect, except for some of the innovations in the accompaniment as well, because you see that the wave goes up and down, up and down, up and down, but here it's not really copying that. It's going up, slightly down, but it's going from the motion upwards and then goes down again. And there's an innovation in this as well, so the innovation is omnipresent. This modulation, it's not so abrupt because of the fact that from E flat major to G minor, it's not really that difficult to modulate. He's really actually just depicting the, well, we could say C minor arpeggiated tonality, which gets it back to the dominant. So we could say that he's perhaps committing some kind of an arpeggiated abstract pivot modulation using the arpeggiated form of the subdominant from G minor. And this is pretty much proved here, because here we got the dominant function, which is resolving back to the tonic. That's just because of the fact that well, the E flat major and C minor, well, G minor, are not so far away from each other, and they're actually very close to each other, as G minor is on the third degree of E flat major. So the modulation is not so abrupt, yet it is very beautiful, even with this downward motion. And well, the theme comes again. There are certain logics which are very similar to its previous form of uh, form of embellishment. I would really like to talk about the thing that we have the similarity with the previous form. We don't have what was in the very first entry of the theme during the beginning of the piece, and we also have the figuration of this accompaniment even from the beginning. And we can again talk about the head of the theme, which goes without any significant changes, except for its fourth time. Now we can't really talk. We can't really talk about some of the notes being kept. The entire cell is changed. All the notes are changed. So this is again something which is contrasting, a form of really micro contrast when it comes to the previous theme. But that's something which is again naturally present in music. It is naturally present that during the harmony and during the purpose, especially during the setting of purpose, these little changes will naturally occur. And the micro contrast is also rooted in your potential because of your musical visions. And if you want to modulate, then the micro contrast in these cells will be guaranteed, because the modulation is based upon the vertical change. And the vertical change cannot be realized without the particles being changed, even though you keep the rhythm. So that's a very nice demonstration for how this micro contrast is achieved in tonal music. And again, we have something very similar to what could be seen back then. We have a passage which is again preparing this repetition and now preparing the very infamous coda, which is something really difficult and might become a nightmare to many pianists. Well, it's genius when it comes to its compositional logic. I'm really looking forward to analyze this. But again, just to give you a grasp, you know that this has already been seen before the the second quartal theme, and this is actually different than the previous form of gradation using this four bars. It's different in the fact that we have the second voice in the left hand. That was something that we couldn't really see back then. Because of the addition, this addition is compensated for the removal of this beat here, which is the yeah, it is the sixth beat of the bar, and this is not really present. We have 2 1 and then 2 2. Well, this is not really present because of this addition here. So the compensation is also based upon the technical element that having the second voice and even this accentuation would wouldn't be too much difficult, but it's unnecessary because of this innovation. As you can see, also the right hand has an innovation that these little quarter notes are not played in two voices but just in one voice. And it's because of the fact that this voice that was here is now here in the addition of the left hand. So it's pretty much clear that, well, it still remains, but this passage is now in the left hand, and for the sake of this technicality, it's also not adding this fourth beat of these entire cells. And there is also another form of micro contrast to this entire section, even though the source of it is purely technical. We're now not finishing with the arpeggio to start a theme, but we're actually using this very strong hit to initiate a beautiful, incredibly technically difficult, and compositionally interesting coda, which I love very much, and I treat this a beautiful example with a very nice connection to contemporary music as well, as a form of perception about cells and about the logic which includes cells is incredibly well demonstrated even here, which proves that Chopin himself was genius composer with a very, very strong technical foundation. The figuration of the coda begins again with a very, very well known figuration which comes from the second entry of the quartal theme. And as you can see, it starts very nicely in sixth with the very typical pulsation. Still a little thing which will break this pulsation with a 16th note syncopation, and then the diminution to a triola, and this beautiful little tuplet here, making these little counterpoints, resulting into a presto con fuoco coda, which is again from the very first view really cell-oriented type of compositional work. It's beginning with the chord, and the evolution is beautiful. So we have 2 notes, but only one eighth note. Then we have one chord and one note, and that's the very first cell. We will clarify it as that. And then we have the second cell, which is actually in a much more visible evolution here. And as you can see, we have 2 chords and only one note. Even in this one bar, 208, you see a beauty of microprocess evolution, which is undeniably present even here. It's something that we mostly talk about in contemporary music, but this is something which is present even here in the 19th century. So do not forget about it, that even such sentimental beauty of Chopin has this rooted within itself. These cells are differentiated with the with the accents. This cell, the first one, has the first chord accented, and this one has the second chord accented. When it comes to the accompaniment, we're beginning on a weaker beat, so that's another innovation. It's actually again using the process of compensation, and the hands are nicely compensating their pulsation, except for this moment in which we have to treat this as the third cell of the entire coda. And he's consequent with this type of figuration, again, quite uncommon because we have the chord on the first beat, and it's very common to do it in the opposite manner, that we have the bass and then the harmony. Now it's the harmony and the bass for sake of contrast. He's using these cells very nicely again in these sophisticated combinations. The second stave is a very nice copy of this. Basically, a very similar rhythmical situation is going on. And the third stave from the bar 216 brings us another beautiful, very pianistically difficult, but beautiful compositional work of cells. We have to start with different forms of cells because now we're going to include, again, new structures. Not only is the accompaniment enriched with certain second voices, then with the change in this logic that we truly do have the bass all of a sudden as the first note on the hard beat and the harmony is on the weak beat as it tends to be. And this is a very nice contrast as well, very richly oriented. And the left hand accompaniment is an incredibly nice way to demonstrate this. Now we have another enrichment here. Every bar is different. We have bass, harmony, harmony, bass. The same things, the same thing going back here and during other evolutional places of this coda. But we will talk about these cells. I would really love to get concentrated on this as this is incredibly important, incredibly crucial, and will leave a strong impact. As you can see, we have the very first cell with the full second voice and the interval consisting of two notes. Then we have another cell for which is typical that we have the interval on the second eighth note and on the fourth eighth note with the false second voice on the third beat. We already have two cells. This is another cell because we have a false voice on the first beat and the intervals on the second and the fourth beat as well. So the difference between these two cells is the placement of the second voice. As you can see, this is a very nice example of the same cell, the third cell. But here we have another variation because we have it on the first, the third beat, and also we have two intervals. And from now on, you already see all the possible cells which are used in very innovative curves. This is something that is not preceded by anything particular. The richness of curves has already been mentioned like this, but not with these types of very nice constructional foundations as can be seen here. And the cells and the combinations of these cells are repeated all throughout the coda with certain little changes as can be seen here. For instance, we could consider this a contrasting cell because of the fact that we don't have any second voice here. So this is like another type of the cell which is here and has no second voice. As these types of the cells go with these nice innovations which also have a rhythmically harmonic foundation, we can see something uncanny, and this is really interesting in connotation with Ligeti's etudes because this is what can be seen in some of his etudes as the structural work with the cells, that he's basically splitting them. All of a sudden we have these two little cells which can be seen here, and these two little cells with the first beat accented, they turn into a merged bar of these cells, as you can see. This is also something that was not really seen here. It's another technical foundation. We have these two little cells which are communicating with the very first one of this passage, which are breaking the structure of several bars and infecting the whole process of music into their own. Look at this. And again, we have the fragment and it's coming back to its very rich curvy flow with many nice innovations and cells with the second voice, with the change of the bass and harmony in the accompaniment, the very well-known cells that we have already talked about, and this is all reaching the point in which we have a sense of gradation because of this motion upwards. We're certainly going upwards to this relatively very very significant place for the overall piece. And again, as you can see very nicely, the cells are present. It's starting with the eighth note, which doesn't have this full second voice, but that's not going to be true for the rest, as everything has the same communication. So this moment was prepared. These cells were all prepared because of this and because of this significant moment. It was here for a moment, then it got back, and then it is evaluated with this very important passage, which goes up. And you can also very nicely see again the richness of accompaniment, how it changes, how it develops. Here it is about bass, harmony, harmony, bass, bass, harmony, harmony, bass. Here it is static, and here it is bass, harmony, bass, harmony. It reaches the point and then it goes back down in these cells. Again, here is another small innovation which only confirms Chopin's masterfulness, which is regarding the skipping of the first eighth note, that this provides a sufficient compensation for the accentuation of the strong beat, and then it goes again, but not in these cells, but in another type of cell which does have its predecessor, as can be seen before, and now we have an interval note in this downwards motion. So it's another accentuation of the cell, which is pretty much like this without a second voice, but twisted functions. But I'm sure that it comes from this. It's exactly this, but it's merged. So he's not coming up with anything new. And this is one of the most important compositional principles which all the composers learn at the first place. You don't have to come up with anything new, but all you need is to be very well aware of what you're using and be innovative with that. Exactly what's happening here. And this is a beautiful place in which we have these little fragments, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, all communicating with the beginning of the coda. And the fragments are saying a definitive goodbye to the peak of the piece. The coda is being fragmented, with the fragments communicating with the beginning material of the coda. And now we have this little process of communication in which the fragments are speaking with the octaves in the left hand. And all of this fragmentation is being finished with the turning point in which you have a cascade of couplets going backwards with the syncopation, reaching a very big and curvy and harmonically rich cadenza, which is surely now nobody expects that this would be something after which we would still experiment some musical process. This is surely giving its final dot after all of this beauty. And as you can see, very rich in curves, really difficult, ending on this very first cascade. We did have certain moments, as you remember, in that moment where there was an A major sixth chord, the very first little cadenza in the right hand of the piano. But So the connection is apparent, the evolution is apparent in this subject. It's not the very first cadenza, but this is surely something which is giving a final dot after everything, reaching the very first point. We see the calming chords, which are supposedly making the situation a little bit calmer. Then we have this tuplet formula, which is communicating with the very first leader theme. After that, another run comes. We have to mention that, as you can see, where this run ends even higher than this one. So it's going higher, and it's then giving us another sort of micro contrast, which is perceptible. Well, we have another calming chords. Now, as you can see, there is another contrast because Chopin is doubling the D. So we have an octave. So all of a sudden, we have a textural change, which is regarding the doubling of the harmony. So it's much more richer. And now we have this motif, which can be seen here, an octave above. After that, there is a very final stave of the piece, which is surely something nobody expected. Of course, nobody expected, if you're here for the very first time listening to this ballad, because this is notoriously known, but generally, as someone who never heard of this piece before and is listening to this on a concert, is surely not expecting this. We have these octaves with embellishment in the contrary motion for 2 bars until they reach the merging point, from which they go in the same motion and reach the octave of G. And we have these cadential chords. This is again something which was prepared very well. If you remember these embellishments and all kinds of little things and trills and appoggiaturas and tuplets in these upper registers. It's everything giving you a perception of something little going on in the upper register, which is psychologically laying the seed for a listener to simply have this within himself or herself. They do have it. They have this little ability that I know that there was something pretty going in those registers. I remember that because people do have this sense of memory, and the piece is not so utterly long, so they do remember it. And we have this nicely accelerating from forte fortissimo, accelerating, going here to the turning point, and then in the same motion until it reaches the point. And this is where this incredible piece ends. I'm very grateful for your attention, and I do hope that this was a nice and helpful way for you to understand that Chopin was really not just a sentimental freak, but was an incredibly technically motivated and technically based person with all of these little details proving that even the most beautiful, sentimental, and emotional beauty has its technical foundation. And this is also a very nice guide for you to know how to analyze pieces. And I hope that we will take a look at some more pieces from this beautiful composer and other composers, even orchestral pieces. And I hope that we will take a look at their beauty and we will look at it in the future. Thank you.